So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Speaking is Bob Ochieng from ICANN, and a warm welcome to this masterclass session, which will strive to really discuss, albeit not into very much details, but at least a very good introduction of the topic at hand. And really, the intention is to understand the correlation between domain names and right protection, playing that along laws like trademark laws and intellectual property laws. I hope you can see the screen and the slides are shared, and be doing this with colleagues of mine from ICANN, and we shall be starting very shortly. So once again, a very warm welcome to this session. We really hope that you will make it very interactive. Maybe just a few ground rules as we move along. Please feel free to type your questions on the room. At the end of the presentations, we shall take a moment to respond to all of them. If we don't manage to respond to all of them, you can be assured that we shall respond to you on email. So please also feel free to take our contacts and reach out afterwards. We shall be able to respond by email if we don't cover everything here. Today we shall talk about, from an introductory perspective, just about domain names, what they are, what is ICANN, what are the types of domain names, and try to drill into how do you protect domain names and whether that is necessary. What are the options available to you? And because we are speaking to the legal fraternity here, I think this is a topic that is of great importance. And I'm looking forward to quite a discussion on that bullet number 2. To help me today deliver this session are colleagues of mine from ICANN. Unfortunately, our Vice President, Mr. Pierre Danjinu, is not able to join yet, but Yaovia Tohu, who is Director of Stakeholder Engagement, will give introductory remarks on his behalf. And then I'll take around 10 or so minutes to just briefly paint the ecosystem of domain names and ICANN. And then we'll drill down into the topic at hand. This will be led by Seher, who is our specialist based out of Istanbul. And she'll be discussing domain name dispute resolution mechanisms, at least 2 mechanisms that are dominant. Of course, she'll also highlight the others that exist. And probably because of time, we might not be able to go over all of them. So with that, I want to invite Yaovi so that we move very quickly to start us off with introductory remarks. So welcome, Yaovi.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yaovi Atung, Director of Stakeholder Engagement and Operation for Africa. Today, everyone and everything is increasing, going digital, and the current pandemic has merely deepened our dependence on digital tools and solutions. This concludes lawyers who have had to use more and more of technology, as even court processes strive to go digital. One of the areas worth highlighting and discussion with you as the legal fraternity in Africa is the question of domain name right protections. As some of you may know, we initiated discussion on the topic during an initial conference in Cotonou back to 2014, followed by another one in Harare 2 years later. We have also a discussion list on this topic after I dedicate this conference, the event in Cotonou and Harare. So my colleague Bob Ochieng will send you an email, queries.nairobiec@icann.org, in case you are interested to join this mailing list. Existing rights protection mechanisms are not well publicized and on the continent, especially amongst our legal fraternity. With many countries now organizing their intellectual property rights structures, it might be necessary to better inform the DNS industry in Africa and indeed our learned friends on the linkage of lack of, therefore, between domain names, brands, and trademarks, as well as intellectual property right protection mechanism. In this session today, We will introduce some of these protection mechanisms available for domain names, but also introduce and encourage more lawyers to get interested in policy making processes at ICANN. It is not just for ICT players. Lastly, I will encourage law firms from Africa to considering becoming ICANN approved dispute resolution provider. Currently, no one in Africa. This requires you to know more about our ecosystem. I invite you to enroll at, we have a learning platform, ICANN Learn, that, and the link is learn.icann.org. With that, please feel most welcome to the session, and we look forward to your active participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yao-V. A number of things you've highlighted there, including encouraging our learned friends to consider becoming accredited dispute resolution providers from Africa. I hope that is a challenge that will be well taken. So I want to move very quickly and give us a very broad introduction to ICANN. I am cognizant of the fact that some of us amongst the participants are not new to this discussion of what ICANN is. So I'll try to balance that, and at the same time, I want to encourage those of you who might find certain terminologies a bit difficult not to shy away from seeking clarifications. Basically, ICANN is a very long name, and what ICANN does stems from the name itself. It stands for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which are the two broad mission for ICANN. But for them to work together, two more items come into play. So ICANN looks about, the coordination of names from a global perspective. And when you talk about names, we're talking about domain names. And also looks about the coordination of the allocation, distribution of numbers. And the simplest you've heard about this is about IP addresses. So largely, the mandate of ICANN is, specific about names on one side and numbers on the other side. But for names and numbers to work together, they need other elements, one of them being protocols. So that is the broader mission of ICANN, to coordinate the allocation of the name system, the number system, but also to coordinate the policy-making processes, especially around the name system. Both of those two ends have got very established ecosystems, if I may put it like that. If you opened up names itself, you will find a very structured ecosystem and the way it works. If you open up the numbers part, you'll find a different, kind of structure, which is not necessarily the same as the names side, but they all coalesce around ICANN. And this is where we are inviting lawyers as well to, consider being part of this and taking this seriously. Today, ICANN has got presence across different regions. I just want to point out that in Africa, we have an engagement center in Nairobi, which we invite you to, pop by and have a chat with us and learn more about ICANN. So we are present in Nairobi as well. Now, ICANN is always referred to as an ecosystem, and for a good reason, because if you open it up, you will find a number of things that are interrelated, but not necessarily the same thing. You'll find ICANN, the organization, or you can call it the secretariat, which we work for. Yao-V, myself, and Sehe, who is my colleague who is in the call. Then you'll find the community. And incidentally, here it appears as the biggest, part of ICANN, and for a very good reason, because it is the biggest part of ICANN. That community is very structured into different groupings for very specific purposes. And the third part of ICANN ecosystem is the board. So the way decisions are made around here is that they come from the community. That community is called the multi-stakeholder community. Multi-stakeholder because it includes all entities, individuals, and organizations who have a stake or an interest in what ICANN does, okay, coming to group themselves into their respective areas of focus. And remember, it has to be related to names and numbers at the end of the day. So the community is structured in such a way that you have a part of the community that is called supporting organizations. In reality, they are not organizations in the literal term organizations as we understand them, a registered entity with an office somewhere. It's historical. The name is historical. So it is, you can view it as a grouping of a set of stakeholders. But in reality, the formal name is supporting organizations. Now, the role of these supporting organizations within ICANN community is to propose policy proposals. Remember, we say that the decisions are proposed or policies are proposed by the community, discussed and agreed through consensus, and then sent to the board. If the board approves, then ICANN, the organization, then implements. So that is the arrangement that exists. So the community, comes us with proposals on policy. They must agree amongst themselves, and themselves here we mean both supporting organizations and advisory side of the community. If they agree, then that proposal is forwarded to the board, and if the board approves, then the organization is directed to implement. This can be very detailed, but in a very broad manner, this is how decisions around names and numbers are made within ICANN. And when you hear ICANN, you should perceive it at these different elements. Unless I specifically say it is ICANN.org, then it could be ICANN community, it could be the board, it could be the organization. So sometimes we like to specify which part of ICANN we are actually talking about. And very quickly now to introduce domain names, because the topic at hand is domain name rights protection. But what are domain names broadly? Today, if you want to go online, let's say to lawyershub.org or .ke, you will go and type www.lawyershub.co.ke or .or.ke. But in reality, what your computer does is to translate that name that you've typed there into a number, because the computer only understands the number. But the numbers have got a very long notation. So for you to, for example, go to the website for Lawyers Hub, you needed to know the IP address for Lawyers Hub, or whichever computer is hosting that, that content. You want to look at it the way your phone book works. If you have my number, probably you have saved my number against a name. So you'll go to your phone book and look for Bob and just call Bob. But your phone will call my number because the other option was for you to actually dial my number directly. Now imagine having to remember 100 such numbers. And I don't know, I know lawyers have very good memory than some of us who are merely educated. But imagine mastering 10 numbers, 100 numbers. For you to be able to call somebody, it's quite a mean task. Now that is made simpler by ensuring that there's a system that can simply take the name that is easier for a human being to remember, but convert it to a number behind the scenes without you worrying about it. That is what the domain name system does. It translates names into numbers. And going back to the name ICANN, names and numbers, for that translation to be done, something called a protocol has to be in between. So something implements a particular protocol, in this case, an internet protocol or IP protocol, for that translation to be done. That system or that process that happens behind the scenes is done by a system called the domain name system, or DNS in short. And that is, the farthest I wanted to go in terms of trying to sound technical because I want you to move with me. Now, going back to domain names, okay, because now we've realized that for us to really traverse the internet to get information, we need to start from a domain name. Now, a domain name then becomes a very important commodity in this case. And there are certain rules around domain names. Some of them start with the actual registration of a domain name itself. You could actually look at a domain name as your digital ID online, your online real estate, or the name of your company online. Okay. So when I say Lawyers Hub, if I go to the register of companies, I will find a registration about Lawyers Hub. If I go online, it is their domain name that actually identifies them. And there is a registration data that is attached to it that they provided at the point of registration. In other words, to have a domain name, you have to register it. And as you register it, certain data is collected at the registration point. And that data is distributed globally. It is not resident in a central location, okay? And we'll come back to that. At the same time, there are three, I would say, broad categories of domain names. And the way they're treated is also different in that manner. The first one is what we call country code top-level domain names. The second one is what we call generic top-level domain names. And the third one, which can either be country code or generic at the same time, are called internationalized domain names. And I'll try to briefly explain. Country code TLDs, or CCTLDs for short, are those two-letter codes that identify an autonomous territory or a country, so to speak. And they are actually associated with the ISO 3166 code as developed by the ISO, which is a UN organization. So an example here is .ke, .ne, .za, .tz, .ug. When you say .ke or .ng, you kind of perceive that name to belong to a particular territory. So when I say kenic.ke or lawyershub.ke, we could perceive that there is a Kenyan nest towards that name. But if I say kenic.com or lawyershub.net, there's no kind of perception about a region or territory. So that is the main difference. Country code names associate with countries or territories that are autonomous. Generic names are simply, as the name suggests, they are generic. They give no idea about where that domain is located. And the rules of engagement are also different at ICANN level. IDNs, or internationalized domain names, are special in the fact that they are either CCTLDs or GTLDs, but they use a different scripting language that is not Latin that we use. So we write using, or Latin uses largely 0 to 9 or A to Z, okay? So, a name is either composed either of, letters 0, A to Z, or digits 0 to 9. But if it is in Arabic or in Chinese or in Japanese or in Cyrillic, then the 0, as you write 0, is different the way it is written in Arabic. In fact, even the reading norm differs. Some scripts are read from right to left, and others are read from left to right. And there's different treatment when it comes to these different writing schemes. But we are saying that we have domain names today in these other languages that are neither Latin. So you can have a domain name in Arabic or a domain name written in Chinese, and it is valid. But it can be a CCTLD or a GTLD. And I hope that did not confuse us completely. Now, with that broad introduction on the topic at hand about what ICANN does and the the position of names and numbers and why they are critical. Actually, you could say to the internet broadly. I want now to invite my colleague Sehe, if she has a mic on, to take us through some of the protection mechanisms around domain names, and thereafter I can invite questions from the floor. So thank you and welcome, Sehe, if you can hear me.
Yes, thank you very much, Bob. You made a very great introduction for me and set the scene. So first, let me thank you and the organizer for inviting me. It is my pleasure to joining you on the session. And today I would like to talk about uniform domain dispute resolution and another dispute resolution mechanism. But of course, as Bob mentioned, there is a huge right protection mechanisms at ICANN. So at the end of my presentation, I will share some links. So if you would like to have further information, maybe you can go and just visit the sources over there. Can we go to next slide, Bob? So as the name refers, domain name dispute resolution is a process established by ICANN. Actually, it is one of the first ICANN policy launched in 1st December of 1999. Last year, we celebrated its 20th year. And it was always a good experience to review those policies, to gather inputs. So it is one of the oldest policy, I would say. So as the name refers, UDRP is developed to set forth terms and conditions for how registrars resolve the conflicts, disputes, or complaints about the registration, or maybe complaints about the use of domain names. So as you might know, the trademark issues have always been a problem for internet domain names, because when the domain is registered, it might infringe someone else's rights, or it might be used fraudulently. So that's why the community and ICANN has developed this policy to deal with these disputes. Typically involves trademark and domain name holders' rights. So throughout my presentation, I will use some terms. For example, I will use the term registrar, which is the entity registering the domain names. I will use the term registrant, which I will be referring to the domain name holder or domain name owner. The UDRP currently applies to all generic top-level domain names. As my colleague clarified, there are different levels of top-level domains. When we are speaking about UDRP, we are referring to generic top-level domain names, which are .com, .net, .org, etc., etc. And some older top-level domains in specific circumstances, and I will get into that point later. Can we go to next slide, Bob? So before going into this slide, I would like to reiterate that UDRP is one of the ICANN consensus policy, which requires our registrar and registries to abide by. Let me put this in another way. Any ICANN accredited registrar who signed the accreditation agreement with ICANN needs to comply with the regulations and the requirements set forth in this policy. If not, ICANN compliance department might receive complaints from trademark owners or from UDRP provider about their non-compliant action, and they might ask the corrective actions from their accredited parties. So ICANN has a controlling mechanism on it through its compliance department. And if you are a trademark owner and if you would like to file a dispute, what circumstances or which circumstances you need to be careful. So of course, it's not the case for every complaint that you can file a dispute. In order to file a dispute, there are 3 circumstances. A dispute can be filed if a domain name is subject to, if a domain subject to this complaint is identical or confusingly similar to a trademark or service mark in which the complainant has right. Second, the respondent, who is the current domain owner, I mean, respondent means the current domain name owner who is currently using the domain name. If the respondent has no rights or legitimate interest with this domain name, the trademark owner can file a dispute. And the other circumstances is the third one. If a domain name has been registered and is being used in bad faith. In these three circumstances, any dispute can be filed to the UDRP provider. When I say UDRP provider, there are 6 different UDRP providers around the world, and I will share the name of these providers where you can file these disputes. But before getting into this, the locations of the providers, let me share some information about what is UDRP and what rules it has. Can we go to next slide? There are 6 UDRP providers approved by ICANN. And there is a special, agreement and understanding agreement between UDRP providers and ICANN. And those UDRP providers are the venues for complainant to pursue their rights. It's a neutral entities, independent from ICANN or any registration entities, I would say. So if we come back to the UDRP rules, there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are some requirements for registrars and registries to follow. So when we look at the complaint at hand, for example, if we have a complaint, or if UDRP provider receives a complaint from a trademark owner, UDRP provider directly asks registrar to verify the domain name information and lock the domain name. And all these actions should be completed within 2 days. Why this is necessary? Because, if you own any domain name, there is a domain name owner information related to that domain name. And if you think that that domain name is being used fraudulently, you need to reach out the owner. And those information is critical to initiate legal proceedings against the owner. And when UDRP provider receives this complaint, they need to verify who is the real owner, because those information might be changed in the meantime. So that's why they directly contact with the registrar and ask them to verify the information, whether it's real or not. And also, UDRP provider asks registrar to lock the domain name, because when the domain is subject to a dispute, the domain shouldn't be changed, or domain name information shouldn't be changed upon request of the owner. So that's why the lock prevents any modification to registrant information, and this doesn't affect the resolution or renewal of domain name. And I would like to also mention about the compliance, the ICANN compliance department role at this stage. When compliance department receives a complaint from provider or trademark owner, the compliance would ask registrar to implement the lock initially, because this lock should be implemented in 2 days, and sometimes registrar failed to implement this lock in a timely manner. So that's why compliance involved in this process and expedite the process on behalf of the provider, because these are the contractual requirements that they have to follow. And also, once compliance involved in this process, they always follow a specific timeline to follow their procedures. I would say they only give one calendar day to registrar to implement this doc. If not, the compliance procedures has to be followed in one notice, and second notice, and third notice, and this might be end up breach of notice, and this might be ended up in the termination of the agreement at the end, because compliance has an checking mechanism on registrar and to make sure they are complying with the with our policies and agreements. Can we go to next slide? And I would like to briefly mention about the common errors. I mean, we have thousands of registrars around the world, and they are registering domain names using ICANN accreditation. And we do have agreements with registrars, so there are some contractual requirements for them to follow. And once we look at the complaints, we see some common errors amongst registrars. First, as I mentioned in previous slide, registrars are required to verify the information and required to lock the domain name within 2 days of the receipt of the notification from provider. If they fail to do so, we might receive complaint and we might ask registrar to take some corrective measures. And these are the common problems because most of the times registrar's contact addresses might be changed. For example, UDRP provider attempted to contact with the registrar, but they've changed their address or they're unable to reach out to contact person, right contact person. So that's why all these communications are getting lost at some place and it doesn't went to the right person. So that's why we, as a compliance, our compliance department would like to take part in those non-compliance. And the other common error is most of the times the registrar allows the domain to be expired or be deleted during the UDRP dispute. In normal cases, if there is a UDRP dispute related to any domain name, I mean subject to any domain name, then registrar should allow the complainant to renew the domain name because, as my colleague said, domain names are registered, they are not owned. For example, every domain name has a specific time period. You might register a domain name for 5 years, or you might register domain names for 8 years, but at most, you can only register domain names 10 years. And after the expiration of the registration term, the domain names is expired. But if the domain is subject to an ongoing UDRP dispute, then registrar should take some measures preventing it to be deleted because there is a right at stake and the trademark owner should have a right to renew it or get it. And this is a common error that we've seen. And another common error, I would say, when someone filed a UDRP dispute to a UDRP provider, there is a specific timelines. You have to provide all the requested information and documents to provider. And also there are two parties in these cases, right? Complainant and the respondent. And both parties are requested to submit relevant documents to justify their arguments, to show their arguments, right? And when the UDRP provider receives all the relevant information and the requested information, 1 or 3 jury panel is convened and try to make a final decision. The decision has, the panel can only give 2 different decisions. They can either ask to delete the domain name, or they can either ask registrar to transfer the domain name to its real owner. I mean, it's a trademark owner, right? There are only 2 options. There is no other options in that sense. When they gave their final decision, they communicate this decision to the registrar because they want them to implement this decision. But in most cases, registrars didn't receive this communication in a properly way, or they didn't take any action because they don't want to lose their customer. So that's why sometimes they might be reluctant to implement the decision because they have their current customer and they don't want to lose their current customer, right? Because domain name business, there are some other indicators impacting the domain name business. But this is a requirement specified in this policy and they have to implement. And the other failure is in relation to the implementing decision. And also registrar is responsible to communicate with 2 parties, communicate with the domain name owner in due time and communicate with the respondent and ask them to provide the necessary information to the provider. In this case, in a nutshell, I would say that registrar is responsible to facilitate this communication and make this process easier for their customers and the respondents. Can we go the next slide, Bob? These are just brief information about the UDRP rules, but of course this is the 8-page document that there are many specific details, especially requirements for registrar, requirements for UDRP provider, and there are specific timelines that they need to take into consideration. I will share the link of the policy in the chat pod, but if you would like to have further details, please go and check the policy. And there are also supplemental rules. In this slide, you can see the list of approved ICANN dispute resolution service providers. And all these providers are different parts of the world. For example, Arab Center, I think it's in Dubai. The Czech arbitration, of course, it's in Czechia. And National Arbitration Forum is out of USA. I mean, there are there are 6 different options that you can file your dispute. And of course, each UDRP provider has its own supplemental rules. For example, if you would like to file a dispute, you need to go and check their supplemental rules to make a valid dispute to them. Okay, and I think we can go and see the next slide. So, uniform rapid suspension. This is another mechanism other than UDRP process. This is available for the trademark owners as well. I mean, instead of going through UDRP mechanism, people may choose to apply a uniform rapid suspension system. So, maybe before getting into detail, I want to briefly talk about how the top-level domains have been evolved and expanded in the meantime. Bob briefly mentioned about the different top-level extensions. He spoke about CC-TLDs, he spoke about generic TLDs. Let me focus on generic TLDs right now. Before 2013, there were only 22 generic top-level domains in the domain name system. If I give an example, as you see in the slide, we are still using those TLDs, by the way. We call them legacy TLDs. .com, .info, .org. I am sure many of you are quite well aware of these extensions because they are most common extensions in the world right now. Can we go to next slide? But right after 2013, ICANN initiated a new program, NIV GTLDs program. And with the advent of NIV GTLD program, the number of generic level domains has grown from 22 to over 1,200. I mean, we are talking about hundreds of extensions, and some of them are illustrated in this slide as well. .football, .menu, .brand. Even you can register domain names with IDN. For example, if you are a Chinese speaker, there are specific top-level domains in Chinese scripts. You can go and register those domain names. So since this fora has been expanded and broadened, the dispute has been getting complicated and increased, right? So URS mechanism is designed to mitigate the disputes when it comes to the new GTLDs. Let's say you have a domain name ending with .football, right? Seher.football. .football is a new generic TLD, I mean top-level domain name. If you would like to file a dispute about this domain name, we have a new mechanism which allows you to take a prompt action through the URS. So let me just give a bit of detailed information. What is URS? So URS, Uniform Rapid Suspension, is a right protection mechanism. And this mechanism complements the UDRP process. But this mechanism offers a lower cost and faster path for the trademark holders to get their domains or to take some actions. If, as I mentioned, if let's say you have a domain name, seher.football, and you are the trademark owner, and you think that somebody is used this domain fraudulently and you want to take a prompt action, then you can go and file a rapid suspension case to URS provider. Just like we had in UDRP provider, we have 3 different URS provider. And I will also share the link. For example, National Arbitration Forum, which is also UDRP provider, is also dealing with URS complaint. So with the URS, you can get the quick results. For example, if you want a domain to be suspended, this is the right mechanism. And also, URS is the faster mechanism. Instead of waiting, a UDRP panel convenes and decides, because UDRP process most of the time takes longer than URS. So you can get the quick results through the uniform rapid suspension. Can we go to the next slide, Bob? While you are doing this, I would like to share the URS providers, the list of your URS providers. Oh, I'm sorry.
And so here I'm told we have barely a minute, so you really have to rush on this one. Apologies to everyone for the timing.
Oh, okay. Now I am ready to end this presentation. This table clearly shows the differences between two mechanisms. As I said, URS is really great venue to have prompt action, and it is lower cost. And also, but of course, the outcomes should be different. I mean, through the URS, you can get the domain name suspended, but through the URS, you cannot have the domain be transferred to you if you are a trademark owner. And also, the URS scope is limited. You can only file a URS complaint for new GTLDs.